my concepts of intimacy and love and empathy have changed significantly. So now I'm like, wow, I looked at how shallow that was, but at the time I would have said that I was very happy. So now perspective is very important. And I would
Hmm.
much prefer to be in the space that I'm at now, but it also makes me like, I now approach things with a larger sense of curiosity.
Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast. I'm your host, Sven Masterson, coach, mentor, author, and fellow traveler on the path to mastery. Every man reaches a point where he knows he can't keep living the way he has been. The question is, what comes next? Here, you'll hear from men who've made the shift, men who've gone from stuck to unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. If you're ready to start moving forward, you're in the right place. In today's episode, I'm talking with Chris, a high-achieving husband and father of three who did all the right things. He built a successful business, stayed active in his faith community, poured into his family, and even crushed some brutal athletic goals like finishing multiple Ironman events. On the outside, Chris looked like the model man, driven, intentional, loyal, but inside his marriage, something was off. He thought he was doing everything right until the bottom fell out. What followed was a wake-up call he never saw coming. In this conversation, Chris opens up about the shock of realizing just how disconnected his wife felt, what it was like to hear her say she'd felt dead inside for years, and how her honesty shattered the way he had been showing up as a man. But instead of collapsing under the weight of that pain, Chris chose to face it. He stopped trying to fix her, started confronting himself, and discovered a whole new way to live, love, and lead. If you've ever been blindsided in your relationship, if you've built your worth on doing instead of being, or if you've lived for years trying to earn love instead of receiving it, you need to hear this. Let's get into it. Hey, Chris, thank you for joining me on the Masterful Man podcast this evening. I've been looking forward to getting together with you for a while, and I'm happy we found time that works for you since you're a pretty busy dude.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Glad to share a little bit.
I like to start off all of these episodes by just orienting our listener to a little bit of demographic information about yourself. And you can be as precise as you like. Some guys are like, I'm exactly this old. I was born on such and such. But really just approximate age, where generally you live, what you do for a living, marital status, parental status, this kind of thing. Just so, a guy can have a little bit of a picture in his head of who he's listening to.
Yeah, so I'm 44. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm married with 3 kids. I got boy, girl, boy, ages 15, 13, and 10. So we're in the thick of all the sports and traveling in multiple directions, but we're very close to getting the extra vehicle on the roads.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get a little bit more downtime soon. I'm a small business owner. I run a financial advisory practice. I've been advising and owning my own business since 2015. So just coming up on 10 years. And it's been great.
Okay. This is great. And do you mind telling us how long you've been married, roughly?
Yeah. This year it'll be 19 years.
19. Wow.
Yeah. It's been a long run. I've been with my wife. I met her in college. I was a sophomore. She was a freshman. She was actually my roommate's sister. Yeah, we hit it off, and I'd love to say never look back. But
you probably look back a few times.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of look back.
Yeah.
Things
we won't go there in this episode.
Yeah, we don't have to go all the way back. But it's been a great adventure. We're in a really good place now.
Okay. Yeah. I was trying to think about how long I have known you now. I'm not entirely sure. Is it 3 years, maybe?
Yeah, coming up on 3 years. In May, it'll be 3 years. So the end of 2022 is when things got a little the crucible kind of started
Okay,
for
yeah.
marriage. And then yeah, in May of 2023, kind of a friend shared one of your videos, and here I am.
Okay. Well, okay, so 2022. And the reason I'm asking is that, one of the questions I like to kind of pose as a way to kind of get into the conversation, kind of telling the Chris story is, had we met you prior to 2022, maybe 2021, 2020, how would you have described yourself? Maybe to somebody like me meeting on the street. Hey, man, what are you about? What's going on in your life? What would you have said? How did you see yourself, for example, as a husband, father, business owner, partner,
Yeah,
all this stuff?
I would have said I was really loyal, hardworking, goal-oriented, very Christian guy, and we're involved with heavily involved in church and in our Christian local relationships. Yeah, I guess I probably would have defined myself by a lot of the things that I was actively doing and things that I had accomplished. So I would have made a nice little list for you around those things.
Okay. So you said goal orientation. Can you give us some examples? I mean, I know what they are, but for the listener, what other kind of ways in life are you goal oriented, or have you been especially goal oriented, especially in that time frame before all this stuff went sideways?
Yeah, so uh, I I'm really big into goal setting. So that kind of started for me when started my own. The first business I ran when I purchased an insurance agency, and that went okay, but I learned a ton, especially about how to set goals. And that was like 2015. Setting the appropriate goals and then building in accountability measures was a big piece of it. And I don't know how, but I heard somewhere where someone was breaking down the differences in willpower and kind of breaking them into two categories. One where it's the don't do this willpower, and one is like the go do this willpower. And I started to learn, late 20 teens, that I was really good at just doing the work, that I could show up and do the work. But I'm also really bad at, like, if you say don't eat a pizza, and it's here, that's going down. So, like, I became pretty aware of, and I started to set a lot of my goals around doing things. So I got more into running in 2018. I was really out of shape moving into 2018 and 2019. 2018, I started to run. I did my first 5K. And then in 2019, I set a goal to run 1,000 miles. And I did that. That was a really big accomplishment for me. I was the lowest weight I'd ever been. And then COVID happens, and I just immediately blow that all up and go right back to where I was. And I reset myself, and I said, all right, I need these big goals that I have to do a lot of work for. And so I set up some goals to do some triathlons and then Ironman events, and accomplished two of those last year. And now I'm kind of working on strength training and a bit more speed. So
Yeah.
I would set these intense goals for activities, and where the pain of not doing the work would be substantial. And if I would always be motivated to do the work, and it's kind of how
Would
it
you
built up.
have said that people in your community and yourself included would have looked at you as a leader?
Yeah. I took on a lot of leadership roles. So, like, our small church group led that, networking organization. I think yeah, that's part of taking initiative, is very much part of
Okay, yeah, this is good. And the reason I wanted
mindset.
to ask this is I think a lot of culture and people get this idea that people have marriage problems, people that have relationship problems are loafing about, that they're lazy, that they're disengaged. But you just described a high achieving, hyper achieving maybe person who's really good at goal setting, really good at checking boxes, showing up in leadership ways, involved, it sounds like, with your business, with a church community, with your community. And that's just I wanted people to see that, because we tend to have this thing where we look at people and say, "Oh, those people don't struggle." And this is hard if you're on that side of things struggling, because it also creates a situation where you don't always feel like you can be honest about it. But also, it's just not fair to paint that picture. I like in these podcast episodes that we're talking to people who are in many ways like you. They're really people who intentionally go after it. They're not they're not deadbeats, right? men that are really in every way trying to live in an upstanding way. And yet, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, it's not working for them. So yeah, that's why I wanted to ask some of those things. So would you have said there were any particular mindsets or philosophies that you lived by back then that feel a little bit prominent looking back? And they might be ones you still have, they might not be. But if I had said in 2021, hey man, kind of what's your main like philosophy for life? How would you have described yourself?
I probably would have said, life is short. So I think family and experiences have always been very big for me. So, go live and laugh. And I think my friends used to joke, like, one day I gave like a whiteout. I had this headshot of, that you get you know, for LinkedIn and stuff, right?
Hmm.
But the spacing was off, so you could put a little quote there. So next to it, I put like, live every day like you're gonna have steak for dinner, and then I gave that away for the white elephant gift. Here's your motivational. I very not very tongue in cheek, right? Like I knew that it was a ridiculous gift that was probably gonna make them laugh, and that's kind of what it was. Like getting together, having a lot of laughter has been very important to me, and a lot of fun and community. So those would have
Yeah.
been my
Yeah.
big pushes.
Well, what would you have said as that man were some of the biggest struggles that you began to face in just the time leading up to this crucible moment you alluded to?
Not if at that time I would have probably I very still struggle with this, but I think under the surface I would have been like, it's really hard to overcome the imposter syndrome uh as you go through. So very much like demonstrating value was a high priority for me. Like I needed a list of like, here's all the stuff that I've done that have kind of that's made me worth it. And if I have this list of stuff that I've done, then I was probably a little too cocky and arrogant about like, look how good I am. So that's I had to, I probably, if things were going really well, I would talk about all the things that I was doing that were going well and justify my value that way. And if things were going poorly, I would say all the things that went wrong that don't make it my fault, probably. That's how I would have operated.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of ups and downs in that. Would you like how would you talk about the emotional landscape for yourself? Let's just say things weren't going well. Um, what was your internal dialogue like? Do you remember any distinct thoughts or emotions that seemed kind of hard to escape at the time?
No, but it wasn't until kind of getting into it that I could kind of pinpoint what the feeling was. But it was that the overarching concept or place that I was living was that if I could demonstrate my value, I had it, and I felt really good. But if I felt that slipping and I couldn't clearly demonstrate it, or someone that is supposed to see my value wasn't, it was very difficult. Like if a customer said, like, was, I would take it really hard if a customer, I can understand us not getting together, but if it transitioned into a place of like, you're not doing what you need to do, that would be very difficult for me. That would be family, that would be marriage, that would be friends. That'd be always the concern that would be rolling in the back of my head. Like, am I doing enough? So that constantly.
So you needed, it sounds like a fair amount of affirmation and validation from people around you in order to sort of feel like you're okay. Fair way to say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I know it's a little bit of a kick to the nuts to say it like that, but that's where a
It
lot of
really
us.
is. But that's like, that was just the space I grew, from a little kid. Now being able to recognize it, like I had distant parents, like not that they were far away, but emotionally they were not close. I had a mom who really, like, my parents got divorced when I was young, so mom had to work a ton, and her interest was shown into, establishing new relationships and security for her and the family. And then my dad, kind of a little bit different, but he just wasn't around as much. And there was a lot of, immaturity that had to be worked through there. And then also bringing in step parents was a very, step relationships, God bless them, but that's hard work, right? Developing a new relationship, not having favorites, having full, love for having full love for a child without a need for them to do anything, without getting crazy, super annoyed with them or putting them down is not easy. So I can see now how I developed a sense of the best thing to do to get my needs met is to make sure that the people around me are happy. And if the people around me are happy, I can get my needs met. And so a lot of now, I would say a lot of, I used to describe it in this way. I used to think to myself, how should I act in order to kind of get the result that I want? That was my operating system. I would just be in that space, and I would think that all people do that. If they do the right things, they can kind of get what they want, and that's all people are doing that all the time.
Well, a vast majority are actually. Yeah.
That broke.
Okay.
So that broke. That led me to a really, that did not work long term.
So yeah, so let's talk about how it broke. What were the repeated conflicts or challenges that were coming up for you from living this way? If to the extent you remember them, were there, or you could say deep frustrations if you can't remember maybe a specific conflict or challenge, but yeah, how did this start to surface in ugly ways?
Marriage is the place where I became most aware of it, right? So I think in marriage, there's always conversations around sex and how much is being had. And I really lived in this place of, if you knew how much it meant to me, then your perspective would change. So I always felt like I just wasn't explaining it well. I'm like, you're a good person, and I know that if you knew how much it's meant to me, you would just act this way, because that's what marriage is. You doing nice things for me, and then me doing nice things for you, and we keep a little list, and as long as it's balanced, we're in a good relationship. So I think between, right? That's
You
what
you just described how a lot of people actually still peddle marriage as though that's what a good marriage is. I just kind of laugh because to hear you say it that way, clearly, I mean, I don't know, it depends on who's listening. You just described commerce and
right.
trade, which is, very different than love. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah, that I felt like if my transactions weren't met at the time that I needed to them, if we're going to keep on that commerce, if I had paid my money, but I was not getting the service that I had had paid for, I would get upset. So, not, I'm laughing about it now, but I know that it would lead to very intense conflicts and a vicious cycle of I would pursue my wife, and she would withdraw, and then I would escalate, and then we would fight, and then in some cases we would reconcile, which is, it worked for me, but I was also I assumed that she would express everything she was feeling when she was feeling it, like I would. Like, I just basically wore what I was feeling on my sleeve. And if I was mad, I would wake up the next day and it would be dealt with, and it would be off my shoulder, and then it would never be dealt with again. And, you do that for 15 years, and all of a sudden sex can become weaponized, and relationship gets, weaponized and feels manipulative. And then it starts to root up in other areas like spending, or, you know, um, how we hang out with friends and family, the types of just activities so it would start to appear in other places. And if I was very, and still am, probably really good at kind of arguing or presenting my side. Maybe I'm not really good at it. Maybe that's probably just the thing that I tell myself. I will beat it to death until she relents. That's typically been the strategy, is I won't let go, and then she would
Yeah,
finally be
yeah,
like,
you
I see your point.
you and a
And
lot of
then we both
men.
reconcile.
My Zelda would say the same. My wife, and I've had a lot of attorney clients who said, "Yeah, you'd be a great attorney." But my wife felt lawyered, and this is actually a common theme that men will be like a tenacious to an amazing level of, and very good at arguing their point in a way that our partners, your wife, my wife, at this time in each of our lives, there's nothing left for them to say. They can't go any further. And so I don't know about your wife. Maybe you could talk to us about this, but Zelda, she just shut down. She just learned, okay, I can't really actually have my opinion safely. I can't feel what I want to feel because there's no way for me to be immensely invalidated. And I wasn't doing this intentionally, and I'm sure you weren't either. I didn't know what I didn't know. So yeah, unpack that a little bit more, how that started to show up in your relationship.
You're right on. What that led to is situations where if she expressed a feeling or an opinion that for me, everything was this world was black and white. There was and I like math, right? There's an equal signs. It's yes and no. There's only one truth. There's one perspective, and one of us is going to have to cave. And it just so happened that I was right 100% of the time, and she was always wrong. And my perspective was always right, and her perspective always needed to change. And her feelings were never an accurate representation of what we were actually dealing with. Right. And so all she
Yeah.
had to do was see it my way, and then life would be a lot better. And
So you explained yourself a lot, is what you're saying, and probably re-explained yourself a lot.
and tried, and often, and I do regret this in this sense now, often really missing opportunities to just empathize or hear her. Anytime she would express unhappiness, I felt that she was explaining a truth, and if the truth was hurtful, we had to really determine if that was true and decide if it's right or wrong, and then move on. Anytime she felt something that was painful, I took it very personally, and we had to, I dig into it, and we'd talk for, when it got really bad, we'd blow a morning, to be 2 hours of an intense conversation that would never get to resolution and just constant escalating. And, it just got to a point where that works for a while. I think that, I don't think I'm alone here. I think that in a relationship, someone cannot be heard for only so long. And then that's it. Like, then it's to the point where if they've been taking, I think from her perspective, she would say that she had been personally assigning herself responsibility for how I was feeling. So if she couldn't tell me that she was experiencing something that was negative, because that would negatively impact me. And then one day she was said, you know what? I'm not carrying your bag anymore. You're going to have to carry your own bag.
Yeah. So to put this another way, what I hear you saying, Chris, is that every time your wife tried to share what she was struggling with, it triggered some insecurity. Let's just call it what it was. It triggered your insecurities. And anytime we feel insecure, we feel unsafe, a pretty normal reaction until you have the maturity to recognize you're experiencing insecurity is to try to make it more secure. And one way to do that is to try to get that person to change their perspective that is making you feel insecure. So your mission becomes security. And this is not to justify it in any way, but our brains are made this way, right? If I told you, hey, there's no water in the Pacific Northwest, you're not going to have the rest of this podcast with me. Your brain's going to want to, say, we got to go fix this water thing. In fact, before we started this video, this podcast, you were distracted by a different device, right? Meaning, like, you didn't like the way the device you had, signed into the podcast was working. And so we're talking, but would you say that you were present?
No, it was
No.
until it was, I couldn't set it aside until it was,
Right.
until it was resolved. Yeah.
That's exactly the point, right? So when we're insecure as humans, we can't really set our insecurity aside and hear what the other person is saying. And it's not a character flaw. It's simply how our brains are wired. The problem, though, is that our brains, because of some things that happen to us, like you mentioned in your story, it believes we're not secure in some contexts where that's not really true, right? So our wives have an opinion and boom, an insecurity is triggered. And it's not like you're conscious in that moment, oh, my insecurity is triggered. You're just feeling an emotional response that feels like I have to get something or protect something. And from there on out, it's like the other person doesn't matter. Did she call you a narcissist in all this time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, maybe not directly. I should say that. She wasn't like, you are a narcissist. It was more like convenient post, like sharings, like, here's some things that narcissists do. Do you relate to any of this?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All of a sudden, all of your wife's social media feeds is all about that. Yeah. I would have been really, really surprised had you told me no. And again, not that I think you are one, but,
The whole process is like, two things couldn't be true, right? So being in this space of she's having a storm or she's unhappy. The devastating part was that this is the person who knows me better than anyone else. This is like, finally I've got my person. Finally someone, you know, I think we all have a really deep desire to be fully known and fully loved and fully accepted. And so to come from a dysfunctional place, childhood, and to feel like you found that, and then to have that be threatened, it's not like over the last 30 years, I'd put way more tools in my toolbox on how to deal with things emotionally. I only had essentially this childhood sense that I walked in with. My body was reacting a certain way. Like had no idea how to identify these things at the time. The fight and flight response would be triggered. And you want to run away from this, and you want to just be angry and scream in those moments. And that's it, until the problem that's causing, believing that emotions were externally caused, or really believing that other people make me feel really good, or I'm happy when other people are happy. And so if I'm around laughter, then things are really great. If people are really sad and it's intense, then, as long as it's not directed at me, maybe I can help, and then I'm of value. And if it is
Yeah.
directed at me, then I need to freak right out. And that's
Let's talk
really,
about that a little bit, because what I would say you're describing is emotional immaturity. And some people can hear that as a derogatory thing, but I don't mean it as a derogatory thing, because when you start life as a young human, your state is, dependent. Other people do create things for you. They create really all of your sense of well-being, a large part of it anyway. And I would posit that all maturation for human beings, and even probably for other things that aren't human beings, is moving from a place of dependency to autonomy. And for whatever reason, you know, in the time and age we live, we're given certain transitions like that. For example, you grow into a man's body, you grow into a man's responsibilities, you grow into a man's physical capabilities, you grow into a man's maybe financial capabilities. But when it comes to emotions, the vast majority of people out there, and who I've met, and I was one of them, we were never shown how to mature emotionally. There's probably different beliefs about why this is, but so you're still living within this state where something out there creates my emotional reality, in the same way that, like, hey, if I'm hungry, mom feeds me. If I'm sad, mom comforts me, right? If I'm, whatever, dad does this. And so we end up bringing that into a relationship like marriage. And it's not like we're conscious of this, right? But we don't know how to regulate, maintain our own emotional state. We don't know that, what causes our emotions and how to work through them. And so, yeah, you get married and then boom, 12, 15 years later,
I totally
this
think, I
happens.
think, yeah, exactly right. I think that it's while you're saying that, I'm thinking that, like, I'm envisioning the snake eating its tail right in the circle. And that's essentially what I walked away from childhood with. It was a complete circle for me. I felt it was stable. I felt like it was the way to go. And it was the cycle of which I was going to get my needs met, but it's a consuming cycle, and it has to continually produce, and it has to continually consume. And it was very dependent upon that. And if any part of that broke, or if I couldn't reach what I was doing, then the cycle, that was broken, I was no longer whole. And not really. And this space of my emotions are who I am was a big thing. Like, if I'm angry, like, I'm angry. Like, that's like who. It's kind of weird to say now, but it's like, I'm justified. I'm having this experience. It's a representation of reality. And if I'm going to stop being angry, something has to change. And no one had ever dealt with that, with emotional maturity. For guys, I think once you're, geez, I don't even think people when you're 18, right? It's like, don't be angry and don't be a dick is like the instructions were given.
Yeah, pretty much.
So,
Yeah.
so if you're not being a dick, like, you should be winning, and then everything else gets confusing. Like, I've been really good. I haven't been a dick. I have done all the things. Now I'm supposed to get to things. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on? So
Yeah. You're really not taught how to, how to relate to your emotions. I mean, I'm sure some people get that training, but most men I talk to don't. I think typically you would have gotten this from fathers, uncles, grandfathers, but in our time in history, our own fathers, uncles, and grandfathers didn't have this either. And I don't know how far back in the past that was lost, but in a mix of culture and dynamics with men, men simply stopped handing to one another the information and understanding, and you could even say the initiation into your emotional life as a mature man. So yeah, this is a huge problem, and it's a lot of what, of course, we focus on in our community is helping men reconnect with this part of themselves, understand it, and then mature in it, right? But boy, yeah, complicated, right? So how did this break for you? Like, at what point did you realize, hey, this is not working? What was the kind of crisis, or maybe you could say the straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, I thought I had a really great weekend, with actually a trip. We went on a trip. I went with my wife and family, and we met some friends there, and I thought it was an amazing trip. And we came back, and my wife was like unloaded, and she's like, I'm miserable, and I feel like I'm performing all these things, and I don't really feel the way that you want me to feel in these areas. Yeah, just yanked the carpet right out from underneath me, and I didn't really understand it. And I thought intimacy was always my barometer, right? Like if you're having sex, then things are okay. And, it never would have occurred to me that there would have been like a disassociation or like compartmentalizing around that and lack of intimacy in a moment when we're supposed to be very intimate and close. And that she loaded everything. It erupted my world. We started to look for counselors, and I was like, oh, I went immediately into fix it mode. Like, okay, I got to fix it. I got to be a different person. I got to understand this stuff. I'm going to present my side. And counselors became like, good. I think she was like, okay, we're going to go to a counselor and he'll get fixed. And I was like, we'll go to a counselor, and the counselor's going to look at her and be like, look at all the stuff he's doing. You've got it pretty good. Maybe you shouldn't be acting this way. So first counselor, not great. We had tried kind of talking with some family friends, even the pastor, and it was okay, but not great. And then we finally we were recommended to another counselor, and we kind of we were going to have our first session. And then I came across like a list on my wife's phone of all the things that she was feeling about me. And it was brutal. Like everything that I wouldn't want to hear, she had kind of written down in
You willing to share
preparation for
any
the
of
call.
this?
It was like
The ones that really hurt.
she was relieved when I left. She felt stress and anxiety when I was coming back. She can't share emotionally what was happening, that she doesn't. I mean, I think the biggest one was that essentially the sentiment that life was better without me around.
Yeah.
Too much of me being there, that she doesn't, she's not as attracted to me. And she didn't that felt very implied in that list. But the list of feelings that she kind of had, where she said that she couldn't look from at that moment, she could not look back at a time that she was happy for the entire time we had been together. Only sadness and regret filled her entire description of our past. And that was brutal. And I started to argue with her. And what ended up happening through that process is even good memories that I had where we would be together, I would describe like, hey, what about this time? And then she would paint it in a lens that was, it would kind of take that core positive memory for me and it would burn it. And
Yeah.
like all of a sudden, this thing that I really cherished is now ashes. And that was kind of the cycle that we were in. And so it was really kind of, I was at my lowest place immediately after kind of finding that list. And it was such a betrayal. It felt so like such a betrayal. I wouldn't say that it was a betrayal now, but like in that moment, I felt so deeply betrayed that she would feel all of this and never share it with me and never talk about it and
But you didn't
just
know.
have it fester. Yes. It's like, this whole time I've been sleeping next to like a ticking bomb and it was never expressed to me. And as a matter of fact, it would hug me, right? Like, and that was it. It was I would, she was at this place where she was like, I was nice to your face and things would seem good, but I was dead inside. And I'm like, oh God,
This is really a
so
hard time for a lot of men because, especially with men with the characteristics that you've described yourself as having, because they feel like she's rewriting the history. And so when that happens, men kind of do this inventory of the past. Well, what about this? What about this? And remember, these are men like you who love to be right. Well, it's not that they love to be right. They have an insecure need to be right. They have tremendous arguing and lawyering skills. So typically, I wonder if how much you did this. They try to, again, argue with her about why her perspective about the past is wrong. And so they're just making the hole deeper, right?
yeah. That's where it got. I think, I would bring up points like even when we go back to college of when we first met and things were sweet and we were so in love. And she was now describing that through the lens of coercion and, a lot of drinking. And she felt very victimized through a lot
Yeah,
of our
yeah,
relationship. And so now this whole new image of me was being created and I was being confronted with it by the person who knows me better than anyone. And it was just antithetical to everything that I believed I was. And I was full crisis.
yeah. And this is also a very difficult time. And I'm speaking more to our listener now than you because you've already been through this. A man can feel at this point typically like there's absolutely no hope. This was her experience. What do I do? She's talking about 15 years plus of being possibly miserable. How do I know in the future? How could I ever trust that it'll be okay? One thing I would share with a listener and really with any human being is that we tend to believe that we remember things factually, but that's not really, I don't believe, how it works. When I think about my past, I'm thinking about them as who I am today, right? And so this is how I would encourage any man in this spot to just see things is that your partner's emotional state today is the lens in which they are looking through remembering the past. And so if they're experiencing tremendous conflict, hurt, disconnection, distrust, then when they look at the past together, it's as if the past is like the filter they're looking through is all that emotion. And so that's how they'll see the past. The upside of this is when you are a secure, emotionally grounded, resilient, present, loving partner, your partner will see the past differently then too. So you have to kind of put on this concept for yourself as a man that all that matters is right now. It doesn't mean we forget about the past by any means. It just means like it's really easy to become hopeless when people talk about the past. When a partner talks about the past like this, feeling like "Yeah, I'm doomed." But here you are. Your marriage didn't end. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I wonder if you could speak to just that element of the crisis for you, like hearing all of this litany about. It sounds like you were never happy together. Did you did you suffer with a little bit of hopelessness and just wondering if there was a path forward?
Yeah, hope. I had all my hope at that point, and it's amazing how much stuff gets pushed aside. Like all of a sudden, that became my sole focus. Is like, how do I fix this? What's going on? I think I went full. Now I would describe it as pursual, like trying to be nice guy, trying to lower emotions, keep things from being super angry. But my hope was in. I don't know how much hope I had. I was probably in shock. I was in shock, and I was like, I couldn't think past next week. So it was, this all started right around Thanksgiving. And then we had like one meeting with the counselor and we got some homework like the week before Christmas. And then we were set until then we had like another follow up after the new year. And so all I was focused on was like, get to the next event. And she wouldn't talk to me about any of it. So she shut down completely. So it was kind of like, this huge, the house is on fire, but we're gonna live in it for a little while, and we're not gonna talk about it.
Why do you think she wouldn't talk to you? I mean, I have a perspective on this, but I wonder if you could comment on that. Like
I
who
was
you are
not.
today.
Yeah. Yeah, I was not. It's because the two things couldn't coexist. I desperately wanted her to rewrite that list to my liking, and that didn't leave for a long time. I really wanted her to acknowledge that yes, there is positive. Yes, these things are true. You know that yes, there's good. Yes, you do love me. Yet no, I'm not a monster. That was like I felt like just a monster. Like just the way she would describe me, and I it was not even just like I'm a bad, it was like way worse than a bad guy. Like,
Yeah.
even to coercion and like her experience as she reflected on it, like can lead to some her like recharacterizing very intimate moments, and like very confusing for me. You know, kind of I drank a lot in college and right out of college, and that had really, after kids, had really slowed down a ton, right? So it and then we got after my son was born, became very involved in, so I feel like I was growing as this person. But I know we had these experiences where I would be out with friends and I would come home, and intimacy with her would be like the cherry on the sundae. Like, this has been a great day, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't fathom that she would not want to be in that space unless it was a full personal rejection of me. So if I had been drinking and then we have a conversation about intimacy, she's not wrong. Like, I was like, I would argue, I would be very hurt and rejected, and I'd be vocal about that in those moments. Now, it
Right.
wasn't like there was no physicality and abusive, but emotions get high in those
Yeah.
moments. And I can see,
Yeah.
as now looking back, I can see how very clearly that there would be times that I can see why she would make that decision, where she would say, you know what, I'm just gonna, it's not worth a fight. It's gonna be, 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and then I can go back to bed, or we're gonna fight for an hour and a half just
Right.
so
Or
I can
or
then,
days and
yeah.
days of a mopey, pouty, angry, pissy husband. I don't think a lot of men appreciate like how this is for a partner. And this is why oftentimes a woman will say she's been abused, emotionally abused. So that the way she describes the relationship is like this because she feels like she has no out. There's no way for her to go through life without having to do something that feels completely inauthentic, completely disjointed from her inner truth, and that she has to, or there's a price to pay. So again, I want to unpack that because most men think, well, what's wrong? I never hit her. I don't call her names. I put food on the table. And that's as far as they look. They don't understand the emotional experience of a woman who feels like she has to put out, right?
And we're probably showing up better than we know our fathers did, right? Like,
Yeah,
we're
you think
also
you're
in
doing
this
well.
space, right? We're not just, I think that is where that tone comes across a little bit like, maybe there's these guys that kind of feel like they're doing more than they really are. But I think there's men who I really genuinely felt, man, I can't point to more that I could do here. And there's, unfortunately, very much like a little bit of self-righteousness that comes with that mentality. When you fall into this space of I am the things that I do, if things are going well, then you move to this self-righteous space.
Yeah.
And but even from what you would think, the things that you should be proud of that you're doing, right, can also be the things that you are using unfairly as emotional currency, and creating an unwritten contract that your partner never agreed to.
Mhm.
I think being aware that that's what you're doing, creating those contracts, is
Yeah, and most of us aren't. We don't know what we don't know. I personally believe the main culprit here is that men are so disconnected from other men, so individualistic that there aren't other men in their lives saying, "You told her what?" And who say, "Brother, we got to talk about this." That is not like here's how she feels when you do that, right? We're so disjointed and disconnected from community with a tribe of men that we don't know what we don't know. And so you're just carrying around like, hey, I'm a great husband. Here's my income. Here's my accomplishments. Here's, all of the pious, righteous ways that I live as a Christian noble man. Right. Um, not realizing your wife's experience totally different than you think. And it can be really shattering to hear that. And I think every man reacts differently to that. It sounds like it was a true crisis for you to figure that out. You went to some counseling. It sounds like it was pretty tough because it was around the holidays and that there's all of this dead time where you can't move the ball down the field, right? Yeah. What happened after that?
Yeah, and I think to your point, there was, even as in heavily involved in church, I would have said I had a pretty solid friend network. No one was equipped for this. No one knew what to do. As I went to multiple people, and they're kind of like, that sucks, man. And no, there was no, yeah,
Oftentimes, church people, and I'm not trying to Jones on church people here. Oftentimes, it's worse because sometimes clergy will help you double down on why your wife is expected to be intimate. They'll throw out some verses from Apostle Paul and whatnot, about not depriving one another and things like this. It doesn't sound like that was your experience, but again, I'm speaking to the man listening to who might be from a
no.
church
It,
background who feels entitled to his wife's sexual attention.
One of the things that we did, and this we had kind of we had, the check engine light had come on the car a few years earlier, and we were kind of struggling with certain things where, with three kids under the age of, let's say, 8, my wife was experiencing like a lot. She was run thin. Like that's a very trying time for a family. And she felt, this her first time doing it, trying to get everything taken. She had also taken on homeschooling or we had taken on homeschooling, but a vast majority of that fell on her. Some of the advice that we kind of got was only focused on intimacy, but not really focused on her expressing herself. So the advice we got was like, maybe you guys can negotiate to just maybe like 1 or 2 days a week and you'll schedule it and then she can mentally prepare for it. So then,
Yeah, I hate that
right.
scheduling advice. Yeah. In fact,
So
we
that's the
went to
advice.
let me pipe this in real quick because I'm not going to name the ministry, but we went to a weekend Christian marriage retreat thing early in our marriage. And they literally gave us stickers and a calendar to put these little code stickers on the calendar of when we would be intimate. I'm sure they had good intentions, right? But yeah, it's like, oh, you just need to plan your intimacy because that's what's really bugging your wife is that it's not on the calendar. Anyway, keep going.
And yeah, and I think that's treating the symptom, not the sickness. And, but she felt a lot of ownership on her and pressure on her to not be genuine, but to put herself into a space where she could perform if that was expected that night, because that's the responsibility we put on her. Like, hey, I don't care about you being genuine. You need to show up for the marriage tonight. Like, and you need to get your shit together because this is happening.
And it's not like that you actually thought that,
Right.
right?
But that
But
was
I
the
mean,
pressure that was on her.
in hindsight, you can appreciate that was her experience. It's not like you were Mr. like living in darkness and you really didn't care about your wife. You didn't know what you didn't know. And this is the hardest part about this is it's happening unaware to you as a
Yeah.
man
And
that you're
I'd lay
showing
it
up
out
this way.
too. I'd lay it out. I'd be like, oh, do you want me? I'm going to take care of the dishes that night. I'll take care of the kids. Like I'm going to do the things that are required so that you can relax. But, none of that's about a genuine expression for her. It's all about like, if this is the price that needs to be paid to complete this transaction, very much so, like, there's going to be consumption involved. You need to prepare for that. And so I would think that I was doing the right thing. Like I would volunteer. I'd be like, hey, I'll, text her a little note and be like, hey, looking forward to seeing you later. I think you're pretty. And, in my head, I was really doing everything like that to be what I envisioned was like a really good guy and really caring. I thought that I was being very caring, but it was very much in the dynamic of caring so that I could get my needs met. And I didn't recognize that. And that
Which,
was,
this isn't a time of your life where you believe that that's how it's supposed to work. It's transactional, right? I think most marriages start this way that there's like, hey, I pay these things into the ledger and, here's my deposits and here's my withdrawals. Like this is how we end up showing up in most long-term relationships in the beginning. And it comes to an end. comes to an end. You can't.
One day you look at the ledger and you're bankrupt. You're like,
That's exactly it.
what?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean I'm this far in the red?
That's it. Yeah. Your wife pulls out the statements and says, yeah, you're impossibly behind, right? And it creates the crisis. And it's easy to go into a panic mode trying to fix the crisis. What I would tell anybody in that moment is the crisis is an absolute gift, because there's a reason that your life and marriage has gone this way. And this is a huge opportunity to turn everything around. Because in reality, and maybe we could talk about this a little bit, a man is generally, he's maybe mildly content living like you were, but were you actually ridiculously happy? Were you really deeply, deeply enjoying your life?
Yeah, and like, kind of like a pig in shit. Like the idea of like this is the greatest life you could ever have. I couldn't fathom anything outside of it. I've got my wife clocked in for a couple days a week on the calendar. Like,
Yeah.
this is great, but I had no concept of what my concepts of intimacy and love and empathy have changed significantly. So now I'm like, wow, I looked at how shallow that was, but at the time I would have said that I was very happy. So now perspective is very important. And I would
Mm-hmm.
much prefer to be in the space that I'm at now, but it also makes me like, I now approach things with a larger sense of curiosity. Like there's a high chance that I'm blind to something that's going on here, and I'm very open to that. Before, I thought I had everything locked down. Like it was, I had an answer for everything. This boom, boom, boom. This is the way it's going to go. And that felt very secure and it felt very happy. Because I had plan A, plan B, plan C, and everything was going great. Uh, as I've,
If you were to put that on a continuum, 1 to 100, 100 being like the best life you could possibly have, from today's vantage point, what would you have said your level of living really was? Even if it felt like you had what you wanted then, in hindsight, compared to what you know is possible now, what was it?
probably like a 40. I was probably
Okay.
I was probably as happy as I could be being totally self-absorbed.
Okay.
But that's where the cap is. You can get to a cap of loving and having a loving relationship that is, I say self-absorbed, where it's really designed around consumption. You feel your value is consumed, and then you get to consume their value, and that's what relationship is. And now now I'm way past that. Like if I don't even think you can get to halfway until you start to be until you can actually truly empathize with someone who has a perspective that's different from yours. I think if that's being open to that idea is like getting past the even mark.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, the word, I like to, lots of people have said this. The word intimacy is into me see. So if a partner is trying to let you into me see and you reject their perspective, you don't have intimacy. You're not seeing them. You're seeing only your own perspective. And so, and I would say this is largely why back then you were maybe approaching 40% of what's possible, because you were rejecting your partner's insights. Every time they tried to show it to you, you just argued it away. You tried to tell them why their insights were wrong, why your insights were better. And you're creating this environment where she doesn't trust you. She's not going to show you anything. And so now you have almost no vulnerability, no real desire to have intimacy, really shallow connection. You might mechanically have moments of sexual intercourse, but you're not really getting into that blissful possible connection that you have when you can really be intimate. And to be intimate, you have to be able to see into your partner, and not just see it, but accept what you see, and vice versa.
Well,
But yeah,
not like
you could
even
see how your
yeah,
insecurities keep all this
yeah, and
problematic.
not you don't have to accept their view. You just have to accept the fact that that's how they see it, and that's okay.
Well,
And
I would say
that they're
I would say you have to accept their view. You don't have to accept it as your own, but don't make the mistake of conflating acceptance and approval. My wife sees the world exactly how she sees it, and I totally accept it. I see it differently, and I accept that too. And I don't feel like I have to pick a winner. I don't necessarily approve of how she interprets everything, and she doesn't approve of how I interpret everything, and that's okay. There's also a quote: "If two of us are the same, one of us is unnecessary." So if she's entirely different than me and her perspectives and how she interprets things, okay, that's cool. I don't need it to be different or to be the same. So acceptance is just not needing it to change. Let's just say that for definition.
That's good. Yeah, I think that yes, I think the analogy that we had kind of that was apt was at the time in my marriage, I thought we had built this boat, right? This nice, beautiful boat. Like we had moved from a raft where we were drowning to this nice, beautiful boat. And I had sequestered her to below decks, and I was above steering the ship, and it was gorgeous and everything was going great. And she would come up and she would tell me, hey, there's water coming in the bottom. I think we need to address it. And I'd be like, no, you're wrong. Look how beautiful it is up here. This is what you need to look at. Okay. This is clearly the view. You can go back down. Once we agree, then you can go back downstairs and that's your world, but you need to have the perspective of what I see and then it'll be fine. And just that's it. So I was only living in half of the ship. My little space that I thought was great.
Yeah.
And having now the full ship is such a better experience.
This is a very confusing time for our partners when this is happening because they're doing a lot of second guessing. Am I wrong? They start to really, they're feeling gaslit, even though it's not like there's a gaslighting that's intentional, like you're really trying to avoid scrutiny. But then there's just your complete lack of awareness that other people see the world differently. And it's a time that's tremendously isolating for women because they want that connection with us. They want this intimacy and they want to trust themselves. They want to have confidence in their own feelings. And so they start to do all this like, is there something wrong with me? I'm supposed to feel differently, apparently. And yeah, there too, I think there's a lot of breakdowns that happen in women who are experiencing this, who are trying to communicate how they're feeling and just finding absolute resistance and dismissal.
Yeah, you can only hear that the ship's not sinking so much. And
While
then
you're watching the
finally,
water pour in yeah.
right. And I think that I would say that my wife was left with two choices. She was either going to leave or we were going to have to go through this. And there was no other option. Like that we were just to the point where she could no longer function. And I'm glad. I want her to. Even then, I would have said, I want you to be fully known and I want you to be, but I just was not capable of it.
You're
I was so
saying that
blind.
you're glad that she popped a cork about it, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I didn't know that I wasn't capable of it. I didn't know that I wasn't equipped for it. I didn't know that I had, you know, attach, like now I would describe these things. I didn't know a lot about myself. I couldn't define a lot of my behaviors, or I would never have described them as being dysfunctional. Like words would have been very bad, like attached, codependent, even just dependency. Like these ideas I would revile them. And then I kind of learn what they actually mean. And I'm like, oh shit, that's I'm doing all
Yeah.
these things. Like, oh man, like I thought I was this way, but I thought I was very independent and I thought I didn't need anyone. Wow, now I'm very emotional. I find like I can see, I personally, I don't think that to my core, I'm an emotionally manipulative person, but I absolutely can see now how I was trained up as a child to manipulate situations in small ways so that I could get my needs met. Like if I needed affection, then I needed to perform well. If I need, I would have to
Everybody
make a
learns
case for time, right? So
everybody learns getting and protecting behaviors. It's it's all of our brains, and it has it's something to do with your family of origin, of course. But even in the schoolyard, you learn, hey, when I use words this way, the bully backs away. When I say this, I get an A plus instead of an A. When I do this, a girl says, she gives me a nice look. So we're all constantly learning in life the strategies that will keep good things coming towards us and bad things moving away from us.
I had such an identity and strength too that like the idea that these core emotional things like I would have triggers like that would like that I would have triggers that I would be, like codependent or emotionally dependent, that I would have attachment issues. Those things, not only did I not think I had them, I judged them. Like those were weaknesses that could not exist in a strong man and made it very difficult in that moment. So in that black and white world, once she expressed everything to me and I kind of told my the counselor did a good job. And I know that I've had a lot of guys who have not had good counselors. So, but the counselor, she asked me a question probably, and I think I was open enough to hear it, but she was like, what if the list is true? And I was like, well, what if everything she wrote is true? What if all of that is 100% true? And I was like, then I'm a monster. And there's no reason that should be with me. And like, that was a horribly devastating, and I meant it. Like I got to the whole point where I really owned that was the other side of it is she had this incredibly negative experience. And my only other option was like, okay, I can just own her perspective completely and dismantle myself. And that's really brutal too. Because now you're basically taking on this identity that's in conflict with who you believe you are. And you're trying to empathize and discuss things from this a place of apologizing for something you feel like maybe you are now because that's how she sees you, but parties rebelling against that. So that really nasty space of only one perspective can be true. And that's what I thought ownership was like saying everything she felt was accurate and that I needed to own everything she said. And so
Yeah, there's a man in our community right now who I would say is going through this. He's kind of in that spot of trying to reconcile that his wife has had a perspective and experience of him that's different than his. And like a lot of men, he feels like he has to pick one instead of understanding that, two people can experience circumstances from different vantage points. That we don't have to pick a winner. It's important that we just understand both perspectives and that you hit the pause button on needing yours to be understood for a little while and you just become a student of your partner. Hey, tell me more about your experience. I really want to know what it's like. But yeah, then even afterwards, what do you do, right?
and then after, yeah, exactly right. Cause that was the time frame. Right. So right after the holidays, we basically set some basic ground rules for communication, just in how we talk to each other. And that was the moment where I started to just devour everything to try and fix it. So I started to consume books, podcasts, like I really full freak out, like I full panic, like I would consume everything. But it was half of it, right? So we were working with a counselor and I read books like Attached. I read books like Boundaries in Marriage, which helps me understand here's the things that I'm starting to do. Here's where maybe my boundaries are broken. Here's where a codependent no more, where it's understanding what codependency is and how it happens, what a drama triangle looks like, how I participate in these things, what I'm actually feeling. But it wasn't until I started to discuss what was going on with other men that I could actually unpack it. Because my counselor was female and she was pretty good, but you don't know what type of advice in that type of an environment. They're very open, very honest about the fact, like, I'm here for both of you as a couple. Like, you're going to have to get independent work done. And I hadn't had much success with that. So it wasn't until I started to consume all these books and then being able to share with you and with the other men who had been through it, where it was like I had this piece of knowledge and now the implementation was starting to come together, where I started to say, all right, this is the cycle I'm in. And you're like, yes, that's not to, but that was very important for me because it was, and here's this process. And then setting the expectation of like, you're going to have negative reps. Like you're gonna screw this up. Like there's gonna be, you're gonna start to think that you're okay and you're gonna mess up. and having that be okay, and knowing that you're gonna pull through it, and here's how you can apply, and here's how you can now unpack and basically reprogram. I like that idea of, when we're kids, that we're going through that hypnotic state, like that, where we're just being programmed by the people around us, and we figure out with no prefrontal cortex how to get our needs met. And then we never revisit the coding. Like, we could be totally dysfunctional, but we never actually go back and look at I assigned this feeling to this emotion. And I think for guys, it's like angry, sad, happy. That's it. I got like this huge wheel of what I could feel, and it's broken into those three things. And there's no kind of going back and understanding it. And now it's like, what's the difference between being excited and being afraid? Like, these nuances to what we're understanding and kind of going back and recalibrating. And I think that's what a lot of the men's work has done for me. It gave me actually a path to start to apply all of the things that I had learned, to begin to start to reprogram and tell myself, oh, I'm okay. And I mean, you do a great job of describing that. So.
Hey, this is Sven. I hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Masterful Man podcast. We're taking a quick break, and in the meantime, I've got a question for you. Are you feeling stuck? Not just tired, but like something in you is quietly fading? Like the tools that used to work, grit, performance, logic, aren't cutting it anymore? If that hits home, I wrote something for you. It's called The First Steps Out of Stuck, a straight-talking guide for men ready to reclaim their power in life, love, and leadership. And you can grab it free right now at guides.masterful.men. Again, that's guides.masterful.men. Let this be the moment you stop waiting and start creating. Now let's get back to today's conversation. So, not to turn this into a Masterful Men or Sven Masterson commercial, don't misunderstand my question here, but for someone listening who's wondering what that even means, what's men's work? You had mentioned earlier that somebody gave you one of my videos. So how did you get from one of my videos to a place where things started to turn around? Like, let's just talk about that and share a little bit of the practical stuff, like what kind of time was involved. Did you... maybe the highlights as far as not specific course names and all that. That's kind of beside the point. But, did you use coaching? Was it community? Was it counseling? Was it therapy? Like, what modalities? Tell us about your treatment plan, so to speak. I hate to use that word, but what does your trail look like to get from that
So
crisis?
we found out that we weren't going to be able to work with our counselor past like the end of May. So we had been here January. I started to consume a lot of the stuff. My wife wasn't doing any of it. I was bitter about it. I was reading the books. She didn't want to read the books. She was very convinced that I was the problem and that I needed to get better. Probably a good chunk. I did need to get better. And so that's, okay. But I was very bitter about the idea that I would read a book. I would read 4 or 5 books and she would crack maybe a couple pages. So I wasn't going the way that we wanted, and the counseling was going to end. She didn't really see a need to go to a new counselor. And then one of my friends shared a video just on Facebook that was, how can you be the hero if your wife thinks you're the villain? And I was like, yeah, exactly. How the hell, I hope that's in the video because I really want to figure this out. How the hell can I be the video?
That was it. And that was a video of mine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was.
Shows you how connected I am with my videos, right?
Yeah.
I've made a lot of videos over the years, so okay. I'll have to go look that one up.
Yeah. And but the idea being that, that's where the hero's journey and the drama triangle started to kind of combine, right? Like, you can't, just this idea of you can't be the hero in her story. If she has to be the hero. And that's incredible. Like that, I would have defined myself in some ways as being the hero in the family, and very much operating from this space.
That's actually promoted to a lot of virtuous Christian men. There is oftentimes a worldview that's peddled to us that our role is to be the hero in the family and the hero in our marriage. I think that's probably well-meaning, but I also believe it's very disempowering and dangerous, because if you're the hero in your family, then your wife and children are not their own heroes. You're actually a rescuer in a drama triangle. and that makes them victims. That was really hard for me to come to, having grown up in the same kind of worldview, to come to the place like, wait a minute. I have to be the hero in my story. And my wife and children need to be their own heroes. It was actually really relieving. It didn't mean disengaging from them, by the way. It meant, hey, focus on being my best. But this was one of those areas where programming and worldview had convinced me, well, isn't that what a good Christian man does? Aren't you just supposed to like sacrifice yourself and rescue and always be the person who puts himself last and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, keep going.
And that moment of that video brought together core things that I had been working on. The attachment styles, there's like a pursuer and an avoider. And the more the pursuer chases, the more the avoider moves away. So I started to understand that. Codependency, the codependency book walked through kind of a similar cycle where that introduced me to the drama triangle, where there is a rescue attempt, then there is a victim, and then there is a persecutor, right? And that me trying to rescue the victim, she might reject it, and then I might transition into the persecutor, or she might move to persecutor if I didn't move into rescue. So we had this cycle where she would get her needs met through me rescuing and would villainize me if I didn't meet her needs appropriately. And I would do the same thing. So they describe that in the sense of codependency, which kind of resounded with me. But the idea of the hero, villain, victim, guide, that changes it a little bit. So the idea that you have to transition personally from victim to hero, that's the journey. And I think that you can't be her hero was very important to me. So I saw that video, and a lot of these ideas that were, book based, right, heady materials started to become like finding a way to make them personal didn't really have that path. So the video was the first part. Then I immediately scheduled a one-on-one with you. And you're like, yeah, we walked through a lot like this. And you're like, yeah, sounds like I can see where you're at. I hear you. You're not alone. Like, this is very normal. And that was very encouraging to hear. Like, thank God that you're going
normal
through
in a
this, right?
common kind of way, not necessarily normal in a justified way, but just,
Yeah,
common.
this is probably an important, now seeing it as like, weeding the garden is an important part of the process. And part of that is acknowledging that your garden has weeds and saying, yeah, it's not crazy that your garden has weeds. It's not crazy that these, in the Pacific Northwest, we got all these like the sticker bushes, right? Like all the blackberries are consuming and thorning the garden, right? Like in destroying it, and just not acknowledging it's not working. And you're probably going to need some different tools. Maybe all you've had like previously is a shovel, but we're going to have to put some more tools in this to tend the garden appropriately. That's where the work started. So hearing that this part of marriage is not uncommon, and also that it can lead to something very beautiful, was very encouraging. Like, you're actually going through this work can lead you to the actual place you want to be, because you thought you were there, but you had no idea what it was. So now we can actually progress to that, and we laid out the path. And a lot of them, I think the men's work, I would probably break it down this way, is understanding, taking all of that subconscious suffering, all the reasons that we're experiencing pain, kind of bringing it into a place of awareness and ownership, and then moving it and either rewriting that broken programming or like owning aspects of it so that we can move it to a place of conscious thriving. I think you need to express what you're dealing with in those moments to other men who have either been through it or who can be honest in their feedback to you, but from a place of knowing the tools. So it's, if just like if I go to church, but they don't have a concept of maybe, hey, you're rescuing in this situation. You're trying to be a hero here, which is kind of force her into this position. Without that common vocabulary or that work, it's very difficult to take those rules and apply them.
Yeah.
So
well,
that's what it was.
One of the problems too, and this is not unique to Christianity, is that if you have a drama triangle centric worldview, you will read the scriptures in your faith through that lens, right? And so people who have a drama triangle, hey, everybody's a victim, I'm a rescuer, I find value by rescuing, like your worldview comes to bear. So you're the guy who's got to perform, right? You're the guy who has to find his value worth by people, what they think about you. So when then you go to church, you interpret all of the things you're reading in the Bible and hearing in sermons and Sunday school and small groups. You're interpreting it all through your existing framework. And you're finding basically just a Christianized way of living in drama triangles, right? This is what I wrote about in the book, What to Do When the Aliens Show Up in the second half. It's all about how this has how these things show up uniquely for people from a Christian and Jewish faith. And so, yeah, it's like you almost need to get taken out of, you have to have some more deeper fundamental assumptions challenged that aren't about your faith, but about how you just see the mechanics of yourself and the world and whatnot.
That was very accurate. Within the first, my anniversary is in July, and I think I signed up for I started to dig into some of the coursework, and then but I hadn't. There's a process that has to be done. I think with other guys, where they have to point out that's a dependency, like because you're currently blind to it, and you can't just see it. You can't just flip the switch. So you need this format where there's going to be some challenge, where you express what you're going through, and someone who you trust can say, point out, like, solicit feedback and say, hey, you know, are you sure that that's what you wanted? Because it seems like in that moment you were actually feeling a little deficient and you wanted to feel better. And so because of that, you were trying to get her to do a certain response. I realized after I ruined my anniversary because I still carried so much insecurity, I was hiding under what I would have what I described now as like a veil of honesty. I'm like, I'm just going to be honest with her about all the things that I'm feeling, and then she'll have to, kind of this idea of reclothe me or like, affirm me. And she was like, no, which sucks. That led to like ruining what could have been a really good time. And I now realize that my first go-to was disguising my dependency as honesty. And, you know, I actually, I was so unaware of how I would source my emotional well-being from other people that I would camouflage it. It was very well hidden within me, and I had used that as part of the coping mechanism. So it took other guys speaking into that,
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, actually, are you sure that that's what you were doing there?" And
I've
I'm
had a
like,
lot of people who wanted our material just to be like a DIY course. I get asked this all the time after free sessions. Can I just take the course? And I say no, because if you don't have the human element where somebody is reflecting back to you the things about yourself that you can't see, you won't see it, right? I mean, you and I have very similar stories. I was a junkie for personal growth. The one thing it was missing in my life for 30 plus years was the human element, doing it with other people in like a vulnerable, intimate way. And a little bit of getting started with that turned my whole life around. So the reason for, again, somebody listening that we don't just put this in a book form and say, hey, if you read this book, it'll change your life, is it's actually the human element, the one anothering, which I would actually say is what the New Testament actually describes as what church should be like. It should be showing one another in the mirror, hey, here's what you're saying, but here's what's going on, but not with no judgment, no shaming. And in a loving way that says, hey, I hear what you want. I see what you want. I see what you're after, but I don't think you see this about yourself. When you do that in a community of men, something magical happens. And I've said this to you probably before and other men. The curriculum is kind of secondary. It's being willing to be seen by other men for as who you are, like letting people see you, letting them lovingly tell you what they see, the shadows, but also the virtue. Because I think one thing we do well is also speaking into each other's lives, like the good stuff. here's what I see. I see this noble character. I see a deeply loving person. All of that allows you to really see yourself, blind spots, strength, all of that. And that's what changes things for people. And that's why we're, always beat this drum about you've got to get in a community of men that will speak to you this way. It doesn't have to be ours. I don't care. It's just find a group of men, we are good at this, who will do that with you, and then commit yourself to growing together with them.
Yeah, that I think that you can do coaching. It's kind of like you're gonna get a part of the way there. Doing the coursework, reading these books. I was getting there, but really, there comes a point in your life or performance that you're just not able to see a little bit of it. And that it could be like, if you're into weightlifting, it can be the way that you are doing a squat. If it's, hey, you are actually balanced on your toes, and you need to shift that back to a solid base. Here's what that looks like. And until someone can point out, like, here's this things that you're doing that you don't really see, I mean, you're just not going to see it. You're just not, until you fail. And that's an option, but I think that the men's work just allowed a little bit different reflection. And the high regard, I felt like all of a sudden I was with a group of guys where what we didn't talk about was all the ways that I was succeeding at work, and all the,
Yeah.
it was had that high regard. I had value walking in the door, and the men looked at me saying, no, we love you. We value you. You didn't do it's not because of anything you're doing, just because you are a man and you're here and you have dignity and worth, and there's nothing you can say or do that will shake that. What you do in your life and at home doesn't impact us directly. We're here because we have high regard for you and we want to see you thrive. And that was, um, the imposter syndrome for me started to fade a little bit, and then I could be a little bit more, I didn't feel like I had to perform as much. I could be a little bit more open, hear feedback feedback was kind of like, there was always an affirming of like, you're not alone. Like, this is not, you're not crazy, right? Like a very much affirming pieces of it. And then it's like, have you considered that you might be blind to these areas? So it was a time where I would have said, I'm very freaked out and didn't know where my worth was from. Having guys point out to me consistently that you were born with it, you didn't earn it. Like,
Yeah. And
this is where you're at from the beginning, is what I needed to hear.
these things are all related. So let me kind of unpack that a little bit mechanically, just so you and men listening understand this. The way our community works is an environment where you are implicitly accepted, regardless of whatever identity you've built for yourself. And so by operating that way, by living in an environment where we're not regarding you because of your performance, but because of what we believe about humans and because of who we love to be, then you start to learn kind of quickly, I don't have to pretend here. I can actually take the space to be myself, figure out who that is, because I don't generally know, because I've built an identity on my work or my sexual conquest or whatever. And you can start to say, well, who am I actually? And we've created a place where people can explore that safely. It doesn't have the high stakes of trying to do that in front of a partner. And you can practice being intimate, right? Because what we are an intimate community, and that into me see, we're giving to one another as humans the ability to look inside of each other and say, yeah, you're a human with value, worth, and significance unconditionally. Now, in that environment, here's what we see. So you can start to hear the feedback of other men because you realize you're safe. Like, your acceptance is not built on, like some of the things that people build acceptance on. There's plenty of men's groups out there, but if your men's group is like, well, you have to have these PRs for fitness and you have to make this much money, because there are groups like this, you're fundamentally not accepted unless you perform. And we flipped that on its head, right? You're accepted because you're a human. And from that place of acceptance and people seeing you, we trust that you can then start to work out, okay, can you hear feedback, knowing that it's offered in as high regard, not as critique, not as judgment. Okay. And then you could start to see yourself, and you could start to, if we were mirrors, you could start to say, I do have some grease on my face. I should I should get some soap and wipe that off, right? And you do that a little bit. And meanwhile, we're also accomplishing a secondary objective this way, which is you're learning to let somebody see you honestly and authentically, which is a must for being in a romantic relationship. Because if we teach you how to do that, we kind of help you cultivate your authenticity, vulnerability muscles. Then in your marriage, you start to have like kind of spiritual muscle memory. Oh, I could be myself here. I can take the risk. I've done this before as an adult man. I've let somebody see my truth and known that I'm okay. Maybe I can let my wife see this too. Maybe I could just admit this thing. And that's what happens. And so it ends up turning around people's marriage. Instead of me talking about that, tell and the men listening, like, what did this do for this marriage that was not going so well?
Yeah, I think a real example of how the coursework doesn't have this in there. But in describing some of the situations that was going on or how I was applying some of the things that I was learning, the topic of empathy came up. And understanding it, I think starting at a place where, when I'm feeling defensive, like what does it actually feel like when I start to, how would I even know if I was being defensive? At first, the idea that I was being defensive was that made me angry. Like, I'm not defensive, right? Like, I get defensive about being defensive. Then it gets to a place of like, prompting, like, hey, were you actually feeling that? Like, during that conversation, where were you feeling it? And being able to kind of think about it and voice that out and and then being able to clearly define, all right, hey, man, that's that sense that you're like, that's you in that conversation shifting to defensiveness, and then you start to dominate, and you're never going to hear your partner in the way that you want to in that moment. And so you recommended like a small book on like how to actually hear your spouse, but I never would have gotten to that, and that was such a big shift, like that, taking that moment of like, I don't have to have this reaction. I moved it from this subconscious space where I was having this reaction to, I don't have to have that reaction. I'm totally fine. And then I do want to empathize with this person. I want to hear what she's going through. And having that tied in with, I like actually visualize now what color glasses she's wearing. Like what emotion is she currently seeing things through? I really value the fact that my wife is emotional and that she feels things the way that she feels, but trying to contain that or logically explain it away it's not, it does her a disservice. It stifles the beauty. It's trying to box the ocean. You just can't. Instead, transitioning to more of this place where I want to be able to witness the storm from a place of solid ground. I'd rather be that lighthouse in when the huge waves crashing against it, but it doesn't mind. So now I can hear her. I could see, or she is red hot and she's got some flame glasses on, or she's blue glasses because she's really upset. Once I started to see those glasses on her, and I can see that's just how she's feeling right now, I could start to hear her. And as I started to hear her, I realized more and more that me understanding my cues, my triggers, and my stories directly lead to how free she can be within that space. And so the work kind of changed. I actually found that the more I did to kind of understand myself and dig into my own emotional intelligence, like how am I asking myself questions like what am I feeling right now? What do I need? And starting to self-source if it's like I need validation, having ways to self-source that. If it's going to be, man, I'm feeling a little depressed, knowing that I can acknowledge that without judgment, and then having kind of like starting to build things that I can go to for that. If I'm like, man, I'm feeling kind of lonely right now, like she doesn't have to be the only vessel, and the men can point out like, hey, do you have good community and friends that you're building this around? So all of a sudden the pressure is off her to provide me the sole source. And that's what happens in marriage, right? You get the kids and the sole source of all your relationships becomes your spouse. So expanding my relationships to, more male community, understanding how I'm feeling, starting to self-source some of that emotional well-being. So she no longer is in this. Unfortunately, I think all too common. Wives get in this mom mode where you're just like a fourth kid. I was a fourth kid, right? We got three kids, and I was just another needy guy that wanted to be touched and wanted to be fed, and
Mhm.
just like all the other kids. Now she was getting to a place where now she's in a place, it's going really well now, where she can, whatever she's feeling, she can be open and honest about it. If intimacy is more fluid, it's how you feeling? Does it sound fun? If it doesn't sound fun, then hey, plenty of time. I'm not worried about it. So all this pressure is off, and she's been beautiful to see her be more authentically her, and to see how she thrives in those. And I think I see more. I didn't realize how much I was missing. So now I see a much wider range of her emotions and a much wider range of her experience. And I also get to comfort her in ways that are like deeply rewarding and truly felt, like, where she's like, wow, thank you for hearing me in this moment. Thanks for being with me in this moment. And because I'm not operating from this space of trying to fix it. So
Would you say,
yeah.
or maybe you can unpack for us, because we said earlier you couldn't do that because of insecurities. So talk a little bit about repairing the insecurity so that you could do that, or speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think some of my insecurities would be around. I think a lot about being known and being validated. Like the idea that and being rejected is hard. I get uh, anytime say now that anytime if she was gonna push me away, that was deeply wounding, deeply personal, and it felt like that moment. The story that I had kind of built up around it was that, those moments of her not wanting me, that was the real way she felt about me. And it was coming out. And so that would always be my fear. I grew up around parents who it would seem fine, but then they would switch to volatile and I wouldn't know why. And so I was always operating from this space of, if she's starting to express discontent, this could be really bad, and we need to get on the same page quickly to resolve that. And so I would go through a freak out. So her perspective couldn't be right. Her perspective had to change. I would really, reflecting back, I would require her to affirm me in her moment of need, which is really, that's awful. I needed that. I didn't know that I did, but if she felt like, hey, I'm having doubts, I would need her to be like, but I still find you attractive and you're great. And like, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
feed my needs, my childhood fears at that point. And now it's more, I can feel it. I feel it welling up, and I can be like, hey, you know what? No, she's okay feeling this way. This is how she feels right now. It's totally acceptable. I'm okay. Like I don't need her to say in this moment that all that my view is true. I can be here for her when she actually needs me, as opposed to she needs me and then I'm going to go ahead and flip it so that she can be there for me, and that's how I'm comforted. That's how freakouts were dealt with. So, and that was my biggest insecurity, was that, she was, you know, that I'm deeply flawed and that I'm unworthy, and my efforts have still left me wanting. So at all times having this fear of being undeserving of love and undeserving of affection, and that's being the secret space underneath everything, meant that anytime there was anger towards me, it was that story being
Hmm.
revalidated. And that's a
And you
vicious
feel like
cycle.
is that a story you feel like you've rewritten? Meaning like,
Yeah, it's work. It takes, curiosity has replaced judgment. So I don't want to say, oh, that's, yep, totally fixed, because then I'm going to kind of take my, you know what I mean? I get a little, but I'm okay with being not okay now. Like I'm okay.
well, that is security. Yeah. And there's a difference between knowing you're secure and experiencing moments of feeling insecure. It sounds like what you just described to us is you know how to lead yourself through moments of feeling insecure, feeling and thinking insecure thoughts. You know how to lead yourself back to security. which means that is secure, right? Like if I know how to go make myself secure, then I have solved the problem at least because I no longer need to take that to my partner. I know what to do.
I was really emotional. Like, I think I would say I required a fix to negative emotions. I hated sad. I hated frustration. I hated these negative emotional spaces. And I would do everything in my power to make sure that we were not in that environment. And that stifles, like, that really limited me. I could tell with my kids, my ability to grieve, to have empathy, to just even be present if they're experiencing something difficult. So now, instead of trying to get rid of those things and get rid of those emotions, I'm more curious and I kind of stop and say, it's okay, man, it's okay to feel this way, which is really hard to do until it's almost like other guys have to give you permission. Like,
Mm.
hey, it's okay to be, what you're going through is heartbreaking and it's okay to be in that space. It's okay to grieve this. Go through it, journal it out, be in this emotional space for a while, and then know that you're okay. Like, you can experience this incredibly negative emotion as part of life and be okay. And even that was real. I can't remember. I think it was you that pointed that out to me. Like, you don't have to get past that. It's okay to be in that state for a while. And I
Yeah,
didn't even realize I was running from it.
seeing that your emotions are not problems to fix. You said something there I think is pretty neat. That sometimes it takes other people telling you this. And I think that makes a lot of sense because it's other people that programmed into us that it wasn't okay to feel. If you just look at the average experience of a male, is that you're told from an early age, stop feeling that way, stop experiencing that thing. So you learn pretty quickly, I'm not allowed to be emotional. I'm not allowed to have emotions. When they come up, I'm supposed to ignore them, suppress them, whatever. And so people taught you to ignore, to do all this. So it's kind of redemptive in a way then that people also teach you or help you to experience. Yeah, actually, you can pay attention to all that stuff. You can experience all that. Here's how. Here's how to do it in a meaningful way. Um, so
And I
that's
was so
that's beautiful.
tied in it. And I got to this space where that inevitably in conversations, if I was experiencing a negative emotion, it would lead her to tears. And then I would fawn. I would rescue. I would be in distress where I was not feeling valued and maybe not feeling loved. And I would go maybe towards anger or frustration. And I would try to express to her how to do the thing right to make me feel the way that I wanted to feel. And she couldn't. She couldn't do it in that moment because she can't make me feel anything. And then, so I'm asking her to do this impossible thing. And then finally, the weight of the conversation, or the frustration of the conversation would get so intense that she would cry and she needed to be comforted. And finally, yeah, now I've got something to do. And then I would feel complete. And that is so dysfunctional. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad that I can recognize it now. But in the moment, I had no idea. I had no idea that, like, that's what that was, me needing her to do something, because I never would have described it that way. I never would have described it as me being a little dependent or having an emotional need. Um, so that's a big thing with that you don't get in the books is like another man looking at you saying, it's okay for you to feel dependent. Like we all get there. Like, it's okay for you to feel sad. It's okay for you not to know what to do in this situation. This idea of dependency, this identity that you've built for yourself on these false pillars of strength, actually true strength is knowing what this piece of you is that is deeply human, that feels sad, that feels lonely, and acknowledging that those are there. There's no judgment for you having those emotions. And it's more abnormal if you don't have them. You don't have to be some tough guy that never feels this way, because now we can all recognize that that's not who we want to be. So having that space where I could feel that and not that I could verbalize that I was feeling these things, have other people reflect back to me that maybe these are the emotions I'm showing, and be still and not be judged, and to be encouraged to dig into that expression and to sit with it, I just couldn't have gotten it anywhere else.
Would you say too that it wasn't in a woo-woo way? Like, I mean, we're not really getting into that in this call, but do you feel like you were shown what to do with those feelings, not just told to experience them? Because I think lots of people do that these days, and that's positive. They give you permission to feel. But what I think unique thing about our community is we have tools, and men love tools a lot of times, right? To like, okay, here's how to understand this feeling and emotion. Here's how to learn about yourself from it. Did you find that particularly helpful as a
Yeah, that's giving a framework for peeling the onion a little bit. Like if uh, understanding my emotional, like the conversations that way. If it's going to be, what would I get if she, and to help me uncover what the root dependency is, and then to understand what the story behind that is, even in some ways to be able to basically comfort myself. And it wasn't done in like, let's close your eyes and feel a cool breeze. And like, it was, oh, that'd be interesting. Like, I can see that, man, this is really bugging you. What do you think you would have if she had done this right? How would you feel? Like, if it had gone perfectly, what would you feel? And then and being able to kind of express that, like, oh, I wasn't feeling loved, because the feedback that you get from the rest of the world is like, man, I was telling her that, like, I come home after a long day and a long week, and I'm looking for a little peace and quiet. I want the house to be a little bit quiet, and then I want some good food, and then I want to get late. Like, it's a very simple process, very simple rules. And then the guys are like, oh, that's okay. Like, but what would you get if you walked in? What would you get from that? Well, at the end, for me, that was like, well, I would know that somebody actually loved me and was like, for as much as I poured out, they cared for me in this moment. They wanted to see me thrive. And they're like, okay, so you felt, the men like, so you felt like you walked in the door feeling less than. Is that right? And I'm like, shit. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I did walk in the door really feeling less than. And I required her to fill that cup. And the men lovingly say, that's not her job.
Yeah, they helped you see the difference between your real need and your strategy because we're very confused as men between these two things, right? We think we need sex. No, you don't need sex. You use sex for something. What is sex? What are you using sex for? It's to fill an emotional need. What is that need, right? So this is where some of the kind of cool work is, I think, to do as a man is to start understanding how to debug and troubleshoot your insides to understand what you're not seeing. And a community is really helpful this way again because we can't see our own blind spots. I need it too, right? I have my own men's group and community with men for this reason, including the guys in Masterful Men. So I could say, hey, here's where I'm at. What do you see? And they kind of help me debug myself. It's been life giving for me. So it sounds like your relationship has turned a little bit of a corner then.
Yeah. By
What are
far
you,
the sweetest it's ever been.
the what?
It's the sweetest it's ever been. Like, there's really genuine freedom. The urgency is definitely gone. It's good. I feel better equipped for, you know, relationally with my wife. Very good. I think my kids too. That's, the stuff with my wife needed to happen. I really wish I almost wish I could have gone through it a decade earlier, so I could have been equipping my kids, hearing my daughter way better, being able to sit with my boys in their emotional spaces and saying, "Hey, man, it's totally okay. You're angry. You not like knock it off, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, if you're down, you're sad. Like, I can empathize with them, and I can also like help them unpack things without judgments. This place of really instilling high regard. Yeah, I'm really happy with how things are going.
I think very few people go through this growth before they parent. Meaning, I think there's some wisdom even baked into that process because I think it's a benefit that your kids watch your own transformation because it gives them a reference like, oh, transformation is possible because they're inevitably going to have their own time in life where things are not going like they imagined and projected. And they're going to feel like something is woefully wrong with me. But when you've lived it out in front of them and they know the kind of person you were, then something happened with dad. And dad is totally different now. You've given them that reference point, right? And most men I talk to lament that this did not happen earlier in their life. And I understand that. I went through a long season of that, but I've learned to appreciate that things happen in their time. I can't see the big picture to know ultimately, if it would have been better. Who knows? Like a lot of my kids were kind of into their teens and whatnot when this happened in my own life. But I have great relationships with them all now, and I would attribute part of that to them watching this happen. So I would encourage you with that.
A lot of the feedback from the guys is very much, and I think that we constantly have to remind each other of that is, we have to bring it back to the present. Like if we're living in this space of the past and regret and these negative emotions, that are there, we're gonna live through this place of judgment and shame, and then bringing us to back, having other men bring me back to this spot, or having, saying, you know what, you're where you're at right now, you are okay, and you're right where you're supposed to be. And now the question is, what do you want? There's no judgment in that. Like you're here. What does it look like for you to live most in line with who you are and your values? And that's the lens that the guys operate from. What's most authentically you and moving forward? Not, we all have things we would have probably done differently in our past, but everything has led you to this place. And what does it look like to be most authentically you? And I think that permission and bringing it back to the present, so you don't have to stay in this place of shame and guilt and judgment, and then starting, and not getting too far forward where we start to live in this place of worry and fear. This reminder to stay present, knowing that today is what we've got and that we want to live with integrity today. You don't even know sometimes that you've slipped, and the men do a great job of reminding us of that.
Well, a couple more questions as we kind of head to the finish line here. One would be, what are you thinking and feeling these days that are a surprise to you that maybe you never thought you'd feel or experience? Or do you find yourself even being surprised by experiences now in a positive way?
Yeah, I'm surprised. It sounds probably a little self-centered. I'm surprised sometimes the stuff that comes out of my mouth when I'm talking to other guys. Like now it's more like, I need to actually, like, that was probably for me. Like, not so much the guy that I was just talking to. What I just said is probably for me. And then knowing that I have so much self-sourced love that the best way, I felt so empty before, but the best now, just being in a space where I am operating from a space where I'm full of love. I have so much love that it just can't help but, sprinkler out of me. Like it's going everywhere. And knowing that I have the power to be in that space really at all times, that's all going to be based on the story that I'm telling myself. I mean, this isn't woo-woo of like your family member just died, you need to be expounding in love, but realizing love is so different. Like the correlation between love and presence is so tight. Like they're so tightly wound together that if you are really present with someone, then your capacity for love is so much higher. If you are not present because you're living out of this past self or this future worry of how they might react down the road, you really can't be present and you can't love them well. So knowing now with my kids and my wife that I can create at any time I can be full of love and full of joy, have no requirement for them to feel the same. That's a big one. They can just be whoever they want, but I'm going to show up. Just on Friday, we went square dancing, right? I am not a good dancer. I do not know very much country music. Like I didn't do line dancing. But I had no idea. But I asked him, I was like, I'm going to have an amazing time. So I let my daughter pick out my outfit, which was obnoxious, and went out with my wife and was just like, I'm just going to have fun. I'm not going to care what other people think about me. I'm going to be a little bit silly. invite them into the space. And that is a big blessing. If it was the other old me, it might have been like, I would have been a little self-conscious, and then she would have been like, you're doing great. And there would have been this affirming. So it's totally this I find myself really wanting to have a zeal for life where the guy who's going to just, the the one who wants to dance and laugh and who can't help but be infectious with joy, realizing that I have that ability in me, I think it's so much better life moments.
How has this showed up in like business owner, high achiever, Chris? And the reason I'm asking that is when I talk to most men that come our way, a fair majority are high achieving, successful leaders, and they're worried when we talk about examining their beliefs. They're worried that they're going to lose their ability to do meaningful, productive things. So how has this shown up for you from outside of marriage? How has this impacted life?
It's freed me up into curiosity, so I'm more open to different aspects of ways of doing things. And it really, because I'm a financial advisor, I deal with couples a lot. And I really have started to alter my focus with regard to I don't push back on what they're feeling. And I really want to hear them and know them and give them space to fully process everything they are feeling and why. And I validate what I can, own what I can, and I don't not feel personal judgment based on that. And that I feel more genuine in those relationships. I believe that my clients feel more heard. The women that I work with, I think that I have seen an uptick in the number of women that I work with. And I think that's because I'm willing to empathize and hear them and the tools that I have to respond back. And now being challenged with being curious about my mindsets and understanding the value of coaching, I have fully invested in coaching with my practice, where I'm curious about what they have to say about how I can improve, what processes may work. I'm open to experimenting as opposed to defending a posture or position. So, and then this sense of abundance, before sharing ideas with other people might have felt like, oh, there's only so much at the top. Now I'm like, there's plenty of people. Like, where's this, it's like sex, right? Like, I used to think sex was like this scarcity resource. It's infinite supply. There's plenty of this out there. You don't need it right this second. It's not going anywhere. There's no danger. And I think that getting out of that scarcity mindset, getting out of a othering mindset, and being able to recognize in a moment with a conversation or a client or with a business partner that I'm feeling a little defensive, or knowing what I'm feeling, being able to tell myself I'm okay, I think allows me to be a lot more genuine, a lot more empathetic and positive. Really, I don't, things are going really well.
Good. So just to distill that down into like pretty blunt statement, you don't feel short on sex or money.
No, or love.
But
I feel like,
yeah, I love that you said that.
love and worth. I really, it's hard not to fall into a little bit of a hero rescuer mindset with that, which is kind of where I end up probably being now. But I want I want to share it so much. So, and seeing other people thrive is very rewarding. So I think
Well, yeah, that's where we have to learn how to show up as a guide with that, which a guide is just somebody who is just open and honest about their own hero's journey in their own life. So you still are a hero, you're just not their hero.
Yeah.
Right. That's a big piece. Well, this has been really cool. I'm really glad you've been able to come on and share this. My last question for you is just, what would you tell the man listening who feels like you did in 2021? Like, what would be like if you could give him one piece of perspective, insight, encouragement, counsel? What do you want that man to know today?
I think be curious. Be curious. It's like I start to question everything that you think you know. Like, and that's okay. Like, trying really start to, if you resonate with some of the guys, be curious without judging yourself. Be curious. ask yourself, and what if it is true? What if my wife really does feel this way? What if I am we get in these places of despair, but you're gonna be okay. So be curious and know you're gonna be okay. And then start talking to not just other men, but it's very likely the men around you are just as lost as you. We all tend to group with similar mindsets. So you probably are going to have to be curious who outside of your circle might be able to point in the right direction. And I think be curious, and you have worth, and who you can talk to.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. Definitely have you back to talk about some topics on their own. I think there's a lot to talk about and stuff that came up today in this call.
Sure.
So, all right, man. Appreciate you. I will see you soon.
Brother.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the Masterful Man podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to break free from stuckness, build unshakable confidence, and lead your life with unstoppable purpose, I invite you to take the next step. Join a community of men who are committed to growth, challenge, and real transformation. Learn more at www.masterful.men, because the life you want starts with the man you choose to become.